with a U, so imagine it's Kiran. I always get that with my name. I always wish it was spelt the way it was.
Apologies. I looked on your Twitter actually, and it said Kiran, not
Kieran.
Yeah. And that made me really conscious of not saying Kieran, but obviously not putting the pronunciation in the right place.
I'll just add that as well to it and just
Thank you.
So as Natalie said, I run an organisation called Girldreamer. I essentially ended up doing this work and being in the sector by accident. It was never a planned thing. I just decided not to go to university. I then ended up, I was on a path to do something medical, but then I was like, oh, actually, maybe I don't want to do that. Took some time to volunteer as a mentor in secondary schools in Birmingham, mentoring young girls from across the city, and that led to me being like, you know what, I love this type of work. I set up programs like female empowerment enrichment programs for schools when I was volunteering, and it just became this kind of feeling of, this is the type of stuff I want to do. I want to see these, you know, young girls and young women feel inspired to pursue the life that they want to, despite having all these challenges and barriers. And I want to be someone who can support that journey. So then I did what everybody in that position does. I volunteer in the sector, and then I register my own company. And I was like, absolutely no idea what to do, no idea how to do it. Me and my best friend started it, and we just knew that that was the feeling and that was the goal. And then for the past 4 years, that was in 2016, have worked backwards and learn how to operate an organization in the social sector, and have been supporting now thousands of women of color all around the world with their development in both their personal lives and in professional development. And in that, it's things like starting their own social enterprises, their journeys of becoming trustees or being in decision-making spaces, and really just tackling those social barriers that they have from lived experience. And yeah, it's been a journey like that for the past 4 years.
I did have a look and noticed your board is just a wonderful collection of women, and was so inspired and thought, that's, you know, for young women, especially young women of colour, it might not feel like something that can be achieved, but that's huge.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we're trying to just take the things that we've lived and done and experienced and kind of put that back in to the sector, and what we learned from the sector we put back into community, and then what we've learned from our community we put back into the sector. So we try to like bridge between the two.
Thanks, Kiran.
No problem.
Ben, I'll come to you next, if that's okay.
Yeah, so hello everyone, my name is Ben Osu, and I'm the strategy lead at the Anthony Walker Foundation. I know there's a few people on here that I can see who I know or have worked with in the past, so hello. My background, as Natalie said before, has always been in kind of community development, social inclusion, tackling injustice, and I've been involved with the Anthony Walker Foundation now since a couple of years after it started. It's about 15 years old, and the Anthony Walker Foundation was started after the racially motivated murder of an attack in Highton in 2005, and his mum and family didn't want his death to be another statistic. They didn't just want him to be forgotten. They wanted a legacy to be left. So they set up the foundation to help tackle racism, and to use things like sport and the arts to go into communities and promote cohesion and kind of inclusion. So charity's 15 years old this year. Some of you might have seen the drama that was on the BBC that depicted how Anthony could have lived his life, but unfortunately never got to be able to. That's been a kind of a fantastic resource and springboard for us this year. But the foundation predominantly does lots of work in communities, and we also support people who have been victims of hate crimes. So all hate crimes, but we specifically look at people who have been victims of race hate crimes, or those who have been discriminated against because of their faith. And then more recently this year, we've also started working with employers, so going into workplaces and helping employers understand how they can be actively anti-racist, how they can be more inclusive, and how they can really start to put some meat on the bones of that diversity and inclusion strategy.
Great, thanks, Ben. Steve, I'll come to you next. Last but not least.
Yeah, last but not least, the old boy last. Steve, I was CEO of PageGroup now for 14 years. I've been there 35 years. We're the world's leading professional recruiter. As Natalie said earlier, 36 countries, 7,000 of us. I joined when there was 200 of us and we were in 3 countries. So we've changed our shape and size quite a bit over the years. Like I say, I was lucky enough to become CEO 14 years ago. At the same time, actually, I joined the board of Great Ormond Street. So I've been on their corporate development board for 14 years as well. So I'm doing everything we don't want our candidates to do, and that is staying in one company for most of my career. We quite like it when people move jobs. Obviously, that's how we make our money, as people get dissatisfied with one organization and move to the next. So clearly I'm bucking the trend.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so I'll start us off with some questions, but as I said earlier, please pop questions in the chat, whether that's to the whole panel or specific to one member of the panel. And apologies if anyone can hear that scratching in the background, is my dog at the door that I'm refusing to let in. So I'll try and speak over it and keep on mute when I'm not talking. So to the whole panel, really, I guess, the space for inclusive practice and diversity in organisations is massive, and there's room for improvement everywhere because we're all human and we're all fallible. So sort of to kick us off, how can organisations improve their workplace culture and be more inclusive, and how can your communications reflect that to attract a more diverse group of people, would you say? Anyone want to start us off?
I think it needs to be a kind of a top down but a bottom up approach. It needs to, you can't just have the leadership and then not have the rest of the community within the workforce follow suit. So yeah, I think you need to start by kind of looking at the makeup and the profile of your organization, looking at where you might be maybe not failing is probably isn't the right word, but look at where you can improve, and then working with colleagues from right across the organization to one, I think, admit that there's areas that need improvement, and not just burying your head in the sand, and then working with those colleagues to help make that change and to really drive that change right across the organization. And I think what you need people to not fear being held accountable, and also you need people to understand that they can hold people to account. The biggest thing that we come across is when people don't challenge racism, and it's like people say they were on a bus or something and they got called a particular word, and everyone just stood there and watched and didn't say anything, or when it finished, asked the person if they were all right, but didn't actually stand up during the incident. And that's like a big thing that comes out, and in workplaces as well. I think, if something happens and people know that it's going on, but they don't really do anything to support or help at the time, it can be quite disheartening. So I think ensuring that there's the understanding within your organisation that, things need to improve and they will improve, from both senior leadership and also kind of general staff body is really important. In terms of your communications, I think that needs to reflect the wider community, not just your employee base. I think that needs to look at, okay, who do we have in our society, what is the makeup, and how can we use that to improve our business. But then that also has to translate into the culture once you kind of get down to that nitty gritty. There's no point someone looking at your communications and going, this is a really inclusive organisation. And then when they get in and they encounter a problem, they realise that actually it's not, and they don't feel supported and whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Kiran, Steve, have you got anything to add there?
Well, I totally agree. The first thing you've got to do is understand the situation you're in, and you know, you may be pleasantly surprised or not, but so you know, not only do you look at the statistics and the numbers and everything else that relate to your company, but also I would suggest you get opinions of the staff as well through, you know, there are simple ways of doing that, staff engagement surveys, whatever, which we've done as well, so that people anonymously can just talk about what they see as the issues. I mean, the reality is, and you know, I run a big recruitment company. It's very easy to move jobs. You know, that means, you know, one, you can hire people in to reflect what you want as a makeup of a business, and in theory, and equally though, once you've hired them, you've got to create the right environment to keep them, because it's very easy for people to go, well, you know, I got here, it's not right, as Ben said, and it doesn't reflect what I heard. I'm on my bike, and you know, in our particular case, you know, and I know this because I was back there then, being a consultant, a manager, my director myself. We had a very big, high work ethic. You know, you had to be in the office very early, and you didn't leave till late. You know, it was simple as that. Well, you can imagine how conducive that was to, for example, females who were looking to have a family. You know, unless you work 8 till 8, you're not performing, which is just ridiculous. But of course, 35 years ago, that was quite normal. And we realized that our actual issue was not hiring. So, you know, 50% of our population that we hire are female, for example, when you look at gender. But by the time you look at directors, the director level, and we're organically grown, we promote from within, that percentage had drifted a lot. And we could see when it was happening. I mean, again, so you do that analysis that Ben talks about, and you can see exactly so in other words, in effect, commercially, forgetting that it's the right thing to do to focus on diversity and having, you know, ideas from all sorts of walks of life and so on. It's crazy that you're training people to become really successful to leave. And that's just commercially naive. So you've got to fix it. And then, as Ben said, I totally agree as well. Once you've found out and sussed out the situation in your company, you've got to start changing the culture, the communications, the language from the top up all the way down. And it's got to be in everything you do. You know, in our particular case as well, it's one of the strategic objectives that every managing director worldwide has. And that affects their remuneration as well. So, you know, hopefully they all believe in it, but to be honest, they've also, you know, got a financial incentive to make sure they do something about it, and that's absolutely key. And there are very different issues depending on the geography you're in, of course.
Yeah, I would just completely agree with both, and just to add something that I find when I talk to and work with a lot of companies is there's a lot of organizations or even staff struggle to define what their company culture is, even making that very, very known. When I ask people who work for organizations, oh, what's the company culture? It's like, this is what I think it is based off my experience, but what I think the organization intended it to be might be different. And that's usually because it's either not set, not known, not reinforced. Like we have, you know, somewhat of like a manifesto, and we go by it, and we ensure that the experience, whether it's team members and staff or whether it's, you know, women joining our program, we know that there's a certain culture that exists, so we can always preempt the type of experience that they're going to have, and we know that right the way through. And to communications, I think culture transcends into communications, and for us, whenever we are communicating with our community, you know, we're using social media, we're putting things out there, it's just a reflection of what goes on inside, and we always make sure that connection and that is the same. So we're not working ourselves up to be one thing externally to the world, and then people come in and find out it's not really like that. And I think organizations try to do one thing here and another thing there, but naturally they'll flow. And people can, with communications as well, one thing I've noticed that happens is that organizations try to jump on the bandwagon with things that they think are inclusive, instead of thinking what is right for their organization, what it means to them. I think there's not enough intention around what that culture and that communication means to you as your organization, and it may be different to somebody else's, but as long as you know that, and that's what you're constantly practicing and conveying, people will start to see that version of you, understand what your version of inclusion is and how it works for you and what you do about it and how you contribute to it. So I think it's a very individual thing. But yeah, that takes work from the inside, and then it reflects on the outside.
I think that point that you just made about people jumping on the bandwagon and organisations jumping on the bandwagon. There's a couple of organisations that we've worked with this year and are about to embark on some work, and they said, you know, when the Black Lives Matter stuff happened, we didn't come out and say anything because we haven't got a full understanding of either what's going on in our organisation, or we know that we're not perfect, or we would just rather get to a point 6 months down the line and say, actually, we didn't say anything at the time, but this is what we've done in 6 months or in a year. I thought that was very courageous of them to say that, because it is almost like people are sheep and they will follow. And there was a situation in a school in Liverpool, a very well kind of thought of school, where they put a statement out on their Instagram and their Twitter saying, "We support Black Lives Matter. Any student can come to us with a problem," and blah, 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 blah. And then one by one, within 24 hours, they had thousands of messages from students, past and present, who had said, well, this isn't true, because when this happened, and when that happened, and when this teacher done this. And it was a real moment of embarrassment, and I'm guessing learning for the school. And I just think that is just to give a perfect example to kind of represent what you said, Kiran, is, you know, don't jump on the bandwagon if it's not, you know, if you're not fully sure that you can back up your claims, then don't do it.
Completely.
Well, I agree. But tokenism is a nightmare,
yeah.
You know, and it really will get seen through very quickly. You know, you've got to be, whoever's communicating about it from the top down, authentic. You know, and it really does need to be very authentic and consistent. So the communication's constant, it's often, and it's over a prolonged period. And I think one other thing I would add, diversity obviously covers a whole range of topics, you know, as we mentioned, from gender there to race, ability. You know, I'm in a wheelchair, so, you know, I certainly think that's an important one as well. And so, you know, there is like sexual orientation, whatever it is. Imagine if you're going to work feeling uncomfortable, feeling you can't be the person you want to be, etc., etc. I mean, work is really important to all of us. You know, it's a big part of our social lives. It hopefully drives some sort of income, so, you know, etc., etc. So it's a really important thing to feel valued and so on. Imagine going to work and not being able to be yourself because you're worried about maybe prejudices or whatever would come out and so on. So, you know, it really is important, and you have to be authentic about why it's important. Otherwise, people will just see straight through it, and then they're putting their CV together.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sort of Kiran mentioned, but also that has been reinforced by both you and Ben and Steve, the idea that you don't have to do diversity the way everyone's doing it, inclusion the way everyone else is doing it, and making it work for your organisation. And I think with a lot of smaller organisations or startup organisations that might be, you know, on the call today or might see this at a later date, that's tricky, because recruiting as a small organisation or as a startup organisation and wanting to make sure that you are representative of the community that you're there to serve, as a small organisation can feel really tricky. How do we make sure that we're showing we're inclusive if we're not a massively diverse team yet? And I think that, you know, recognition of the range of different things that make a person who they are, as well as, you know, the visual, you know, race, gender, ability, things like that, and focusing on inclusive factors as well as, you know, other inclusive factors as well as those, about the way people work and things.
I just don't see how people can see it being a problem where you look at your team and you go, oh, we're quite predominantly male. Let's get a couple of women in, or you know, people who identify as any other gender, or oh yeah, this team is predominantly white, or do you know what, let's diversify the you know, the amount of people from ethnic backgrounds we've got in. I can't understand how people see that being an issue. That just might be me because I am, you know, who I am and I've always been in this world. But it's like, why would you not want a diverse team that is representative of the many different groups that we've, you know, got that make up our society?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think there's a huge level of I think probably fear of unknown for a lot of people, which can contribute. I think one of the questions that came through before the session that I wanted to put to the panel was, what advice do you give to those people, those individuals who are afraid to speak about things or do something different for fear of getting it wrong? You know, as you said, Ben, around the organisations who hadn't put a statement out initially because they thought, we don't really know where we're at yet. What advice would you give to people who are, you know, don't want to upset anyone, don't want to, you know, offend someone or say the wrong thing?
I don't know what they can say that would be wrong, to be honest. If they come out and say, we've got a problem and we understand that we've got a problem, or maybe not even within our organisation per se, but, you know, there's a problem in society and we could probably do more to fix or help it or improve the situation, then I wouldn't say that's wrong. I would say that that's quite a brave thing to do. Unless they come out and they say, you know, there's not a problem in our organisation, and then actually you take a little bit of a look and well, there clearly is, then I don't see how it can negatively affect it, and that's down to whoever's leading the organisation recognising that you know, that's the case.
Yeah, I think it is very brave for somebody to speak out, especially if there is something fundamentally wrong with the company and the company's not reacting in any way, and you can see it but nobody else can, and you're relatively junior or whatever. It's quite a brave thing to do, to speak out, and I think it's important as leaders that we all create an environment where they can. You know, whether you have shadow boards in the company or discussion groups or whatever, you've got to understand them. You know, the reality is my workforce is mostly in their sort of mid to late 20s or early 30s. And that's clearly not my age group. So I've got to understand them. I've got to understand what's important to them. And there will be things that weren't important to me as a youngster, but are important to them now. And we've got to listen to them. So if you're not creating the environment where people want to speak out and feel encouraged to do it, even if sometimes you create anonymous helplines or whatever, where somebody can actually do something anonymously, because they're terrified of, you know, this might affect my bonus or my promotion or whatever. You know, I don't want to speak out and, you know, upset anyone, which is, as Ben said, ridiculous. But of course, that's understandable that some people would have that fear. It does take courage to speak out, and I think as leaders we've just got to create the opportunity and the methods so that people can give their true opinions of what they think of an organisation and the culture. Otherwise, you're just going to be locked in the past.
And as leaders of those organisations, do you think that there's a fear or worry about saying the wrong thing to staff members or to employees? You know, using the wrong language, for example, or getting something wrong?
I think I wanted to add to something Ben said, actually, and it goes to your point as well, is I think, so people are judging you know, your intention more than you getting it right. It's being honest about where you are and what stage you're at in the journey versus only speaking when you think you've got it right. There's something in that learning process and being open during that. And I think if you're like, oh, I'm unsure, but this is where I am now, communicating that and even saying that we're not there yet, I don't feel I am, or our organization doesn't feel like it is. This is where we are on our journey so far, and keeping that kind of line of communication open rather than thinking you've got it, but then also being like, well, I might not, and then just saying just that part. It's that kind of lead up to that, so people can see, oh yeah, I've seen that from myself, I've seen that you've been doing this and you've been doing that. But to only speak when you think you've got it right and then to be unsure and that be the only thing people can see or take from you, I think that's the danger zone. And like you said, maybe that happens because people are fearful as you go along. But I think just being able to be honest at every point is probably the safest bet then. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Like, I think it all speaks to a similar point that you know, it's not wrong to try and be better.
Mm-hmm.
And to, you know, that learning, if it's a learning organisation and a learning culture, that, you know, we'll get some things wrong along the way, but tell us if we're doing that wrong and how we can do better, and we can learn, you know, together as well.
Exactly. And I think sorry, on the question about, you know, people using wrong language or whatever. Let's say, for instance, the organisation I worked in, you know, someone referred to me as being, you know, coloured or half caste. I personally wouldn't take offence to it, but if I did and I pointed it out to them and I said, you know what, I don't really appreciate you using that term, can you use a better term? And they consistently continue to do it, and I consistently point, then I would see that as being an issue, and I would expect that would needed to be sorted out. There's a friend of mine who works, she's a civil servant, and it was one of the days that I think it was celebrating trans people, and they'd done like an event in the office, and they put like trans flags up and stuff. And she came in and she addressed one of her trans colleagues using the wrong pronoun, and she actually generally didn't understand, or it just slipped her mind. And her colleague picked it up on it, and she's like, well, do you know what? I appreciate that you've picked me up on it, but the intent wasn't there. I think it was going back to what Kiran was saying about having that intent. I think if it gets picked up on and then it consistently happens again and again, then that's when it becomes an issue, and it needs to be addressed and sorted out.
Yeah, great, thank you. We've got loads of questions coming through. I've got one that's not got anyone's name on, so I'll just read it out, but I will try and encourage people to unmute themselves for their questions. One of the questions that's come through is, I'm interested in hearing views on how to re-energise people who have been in their role for years and are fearful or resistant of change.
Well, yeah, and you often get people like that, you know, who've been in the same job and you know, maybe their capability has only taken them so far in their career, and they've reached that level. But there are lots of projects, things that you can do to engage them outside of just their core job description, and I think that's absolutely. And you'll find certain people, they're great at their job, they've reached the level they're going to reach, but they have other strengths which you can harness on projects or initiatives or something that the company is trying to do. And I think quite often I like giving them a project or working in a team that actually relates to something that they are uncomfortable to change. You said, you know, they're resistant to change, they just want to do it the same way and so on. We'll get them actually to be part of the working party that is going to change the software in that company, or whatever it is, the change that you're probably envisaging will happen. Get them to work with the program. rather than just literally have the program come to them and force them to change, and they feel uncomfortable and resistant and so on. So, you know, somebody who's been in the same job for a while, give them some variety. And I don't see why that should be difficult.
I think on that point, for me, yeah, I think it's understanding where that person is in their life and having that conversation with them, because it might not be anything to do with work that's affecting how they work. It might be something to do in their family life or where they are, you know, in terms of their age or whatever it might be. And I think just, again, I think what this all comes down to and boils down to is communication and having really good conversations so that we can all understand, learn, and then take action. So I think if there's someone in your team or within your organization who maybe just doesn't have the passion that they once had because they've been in the job a long time, or things are changing and we're moving into a completely different world, then I think the first thing to do is just sit down with them and understand what their fears are and see if there's anything that they are passionate about that they could then take on the mantle for and run with.
Yeah, great advice. Thanks, guys. I've got a question from Maxine Ennis. Maxine, do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Hi guys. Sorry, I'm having problems with my video. I do apologise. It's really a question to all of the panel, really. What's your most challenging moment and how did you tackle it?
Well, I'll go, I guess. Probably two. One, stepping into the job that I've got after a CEO who'd been doing the job for 16 years. You know, his imprint was very much on the business. It was about 2,000 people in those days. And he actually became ill. So he suddenly departed. And therefore I was suddenly in as the CEO. So I hadn't gone through a long induction or preparation or anything for the job. So it was uphill from there. And you know, I had to very quickly work out what was good about the business, which is why I've been there for so long, but also what was bad and what needed to change. And there were some big fundamental changes that I knew we needed to go through. And getting them through was going to be very, very difficult with all of the different cultures and so on that we're in, because we're in so many countries. So, and we were operating very differently around the world in different markets. And, you know, I didn't believe that some of those methods were correct. So there was a lot of, you know, personal involvement in a lot of those geographies, and I yet needed to drive consistency around the world and make sure that we had global initiatives on diversity, for example, which I kicked off almost immediately. So that was the first. The second probably was, you know, last year I had a pretty catastrophic accident, nearly died. You know, in a coma for 3 days, in hospital for 4.5 months. You know, and I was anxious to get back to work and so on, but you know, it was quite a challenge to do that. You know, keep the reins going and keep communicating with the organisation. During that period, I was in hospital and obviously picking up the reins when it came back. So I think that was pretty challenging as well.
Thanks, Steve. Ben, what about you? What was your most challenging moment then?
I would say my most challenging moment, I think it relates back to one of the questions that was asked before, or the point. It's around change and, you know, people who are afraid of change. I joined an organisation a couple of years ago to do some work, and it was a very stagnant organisation. It had been going for about 25 years. It needed, you know, that boost of passion pumped back into it, and you know, they needed to catch up with the times in terms of, you know, their digital infrastructure. Again, it was a very homogenous group of people that were working in that organisation, and they had literally just ticked along for about 25 years. And I think I was probably the first person of colour that had ever worked in the organisation. And I don't think that was because anyone was particularly racist. I just thought that there was no diversity of thought within there, so that, you know, they've never, or they recruited within their own likeness. And I tried to start some new initiatives, which were received well by the senior leadership team, but it just felt like a bit of a challenge to kind of get through. And I suppose another situation that I kind of find most challenging at the minute is, and someone mentioned it in the chat before, about intersectionality. And we are not all just one type of person. We are so many different facets of people. And we do work at the minute that involves different races, different faiths, different sexual and gender groups. And it's striking that balance and helping bring an understanding between those who, let's say, are from a particular faith community that have not very nice views on people who are from the LGBT community, and how do we get them to marry together and understand each other and work to improve the lives of everyone. And for me personally, you know, I'm Black, gay, and I've got dyslexia, so I'm kind of like, I'm all those tokenistic tick boxes that you can find, and I'm just like, how do we get everyone that's around this table to understand? And fortunately, I've not came up against too much of the homophobia side, especially when dealing with people from particular faith groups. And I think that's kind of a credit to the people that they are and the people that we have within those faith groups. But I always have that anxiety of, okay, what do we do when we do encounter this particular situation? How is it going to unfold? How do we make sure that, you know, we make sure that everyone feels included, and that we also kind of make sure that we not reprimand, but help the perpetrator or the person that's not being particularly nice understand that what they're saying doesn't really fit in with how society is and should be, and you know, to make sure that we have true inclusion and diversity.
Thanks, Ben. Oh, over to you, Girldreamer.
Thanks, Maxine. I think my biggest challenge has been being taken seriously throughout this whole journey that I've been on. Actually, I think for the longest time, and maybe even now, but less so, like, people used to just call Girldreamer like a project. They used to be like, oh, really great, like, project that you do. And I was like, no, it's like a real, you know, it's a real company, it's a real business, it's a thing. And I think especially when it started, it was constantly trying to prove why I should be in the space, why Girldreamer needs to exist, why these types of organizations run by people like me need to be here. And that really came down to the value of lived experience when leading companies and when supporting communities. And because at the time, especially when we started, there wasn't much on that at the time. There wasn't much about, it was like, what's your experience in the sector, or what's your experience in business, or what's your experience in these areas? And I was like, mostly lived, as in my like early 20s. I haven't done much else in the way of formal sort of qualifications or learning, but, you know, I know how to tackle this problem. I know how to support this community, and proving that for 4 years has been a real challenge. But I think the thing that now that's different and have overcome it is by just, well, still being here 4 years later, and being really confident in how I'm able to make people or support people in understanding the value in this work, and being led by people who have lived the thing that they're trying to to tackle and support. So yeah, I think by being here takes on that challenge.
Oh, thank you so much. All of you very inspirational, and credit to the sector. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maxine. One of the questions that we wanted to sort of highlight was around the difference between sort of individuals' experiences and the systemic issues that are in full force across the country and the world. So I suppose I'll word it in sort of where's best to invest in the sort of learning and development of your individuals when the systemic issues are external often to your organisation as well. How do you guys take on the systemic within your leadership?
I think again it comes down to the first question about changing the culture of the organisation. I think it needs to be that top-down, bottom-up approach. It needs to be everyone. It can't just be led by the leadership and fed down. But I think what needs to happen is the leadership need to come out and have a zero tolerance approach, and they really need to act, and they need to do something if a problem is highlighted to encourage confidence within the organisation, within the leadership team. I think in terms of training and development, I always find it weird to call it training, because we don't train people. People don't train to be, not bigoted morons. It's we need to come up with a better word than training.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. I think it's all you can do is have as much awareness raising, I suppose, as possible, and you do everything to promote and support. And I think someone again mentioned it before in the chat, is normalize these conversations that we have about race or disability or gender and or whatever it might be, and just make sure that runs through the core of your organization. And let's celebrate people. Let's celebrate people from all across society and sectors. We done a campaign last month for Black History Month, where across, I think there was 8 billboards in Liverpool city centre. We celebrated people from the Black community who had done well, who were young and just starting on the kind of the start of their career, or were quite older and were coming up towards retirement. And that campaign was inspired by showing people that, Black people don't just go into sport or into entertainment. They're accountants, they're lawyers, they're engineers, they're scientists. And it was about celebrating people. And now, throughout next year, we're going to develop a whole range of projects that looks at a number of the different diversity strands to celebrate those people. And I think within your organisation, that's what you should be doing. I'm sure in Steve's organisation, there's hundreds of people from different groups that they celebrate every single day. And it's about putting that in your communications. It's about letting teams know, and it's about getting teams to galvanise people and supporting people. But again, it all filters back to this culture change programme that needs to happen. And I suppose there was a part of the question which talked about external factors. And I think just generally by you doing your bit within your organisation will actually go and leak outside to help affect the change that needs to happen within wider society. So, yeah.
Thanks. I don't know if anyone else has got, we've got more questions coming through, but if you've got further comments on that.
I could just add on to Ben, I think he's totally right. I mean, training is a funny thing. You can't train somebody to not be bigoted, I think he said. I get that, you're absolutely right. But you can train them to make them self-aware. So for example, unconscious bias training, which we put all of our management through. They don't realize that they have an unconscious bias because it's unconscious. And yet you can put them through training and make them aware of it and make them realize what they're doing. And you know, as somebody said earlier, I think it was Ben, you know, we often recruit in our own image. That's a mistake, because you're just going to end up with more Steve Inghams just giving you the same opinion as you would have. So you're not going to get that diversity of ideas and everything else that you want. So that's absolutely key. The other thing, and in a large organization like this, Ben's right, we have a lot of people in all sorts of groups who celebrate that and speak openly. We use, in our particular organization, we have a product called Yammer, which is a social media, which is a Microsoft product. And it's an internal, safe social media where we can all talk, announce things, from a celebration, a fantastic result, you know, a concern people have got, whatever it is. And, you know, I'm one of the biggest users on it, and make video announcements on it and so on, and make statements. But we have a lot of people behind some of the initiatives we've run, be them women at Page or parents at Page or ability at Page, you know, where people come out and talk. So we've got Pride at Page, and we had a lot of that community come out and actually talk about how important it is for them to be open about their sexuality and so on, and you know, working at the company when they came out, what's the reaction they get, how comfortable they are now that they have come out, and the reaction they've had, and you know, and that helps others come out or talk about it or feel more comfortable. And we have the same with mental health, you know, which is particularly relevant, I think, during lockdown and you know, this year, which has clearly been challenging for most people. People coming out and going, yeah, I've had an eating disorder, which I fight all the time, and they've talked about their particular issue, and it's made others feel more comfortable. They can talk openly about their challenges and so on. And I think that's again a very good method to be able to, because it really is important. Some of our best people in the business, you know, they come from a huge variety, a huge diversity, and they may have challenges and so on, but if supported correctly, can be incredibly valuable to the business. So, you know, it's important.
I'll just quickly add.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah. Just quickly, I think my point would be that I think you can't fix what's out there until you fix what's going on in here. And I think it's the same, like, you know, even when you talk about or look at your own personal development, and you try to go, okay, I'm going to sort of sit, you know, it's about developing or going inward, looking at myself and stuff before you kind of tackle what's going on around you. And I think it works the same here. Like, you know, we've got to focus on fixing the internal culture, what our own values are, how we want to tackle what's going on within our organizations for it to be the best, you know, version of itself, or the picture that we want to see. If more organizations went inwardly, if they focused on the issues or the things that are happening right there on the doorstep, and tackled that first, and one by one organizations were doing that, and that change was happening in that way, that would lead eventually to that wider change, to that more systemic change. But because everybody's kind of looking outward first and going, oh yeah, that area could do with a bit of this, or this could, and it's just a bunch of opinions going out outwardly about what needs to be done. And because it seems so broad when you look at it like that, you may not even understand how you can play into that picture or what you can do. But if you start with right here, and you look at your own, and you look at, you know, sort of at your own house, and sort that out first, I think that then will lead, one, easier and more manageable steps for individuals to feel like they're doing something and playing into the bigger picture. And two, if enough people do it, it will change the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I
love that. I think, you know, it's important to be aware of what's going on outside, but without that change in yourself, or in those in the smaller circles around you. They say, don't they, you know, influence what you can and change what you can in your own sphere of influence, and then, you know, extend that further. I
think there was there's a point, sorry, that Jen put in the chat about, you know, we're still looking at a white supremacist system, and organisations and society benefiting from that kind of status quo and not wanting to change. I would completely agree with that. When people just feed into that, whether they do it intentionally or not. And I think that's why we have to change the narrative and the story and start talking about equity and not equality. Because in order to, or one of the ways in which we can change that status quo is by elevating more people from different backgrounds within society, but also within our organisation. So again, one of the clients we're working with, they worked for a previous business, and that business was like, yeah, we're really diverse, look at our representation figures, blah, 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 blah. And she drilled down further and she was like, okay, yeah, you know what, you do have good figures in terms of your diversity and representation, but everyone is on the bottom rungs of the ladder. As soon as you get to a particular position, no one's coming through. And I feel like in terms of changing society and changing and challenging that status quo, and I think Steve said it before as well, is we need to not get people in, but we need to get people through and retain them, and then leave the doors open so that it's a flow. And it's not about the world or anyone taking control or well, it is about some people losing control, which is why we're in the situation, but it's about making a more equitable society that we live and work in. And I think equity is the key word in all of this.
Yeah, great, thank you. I mean, we've had loads of comments coming through. I'm sure you've been able to keep track in the chat. I mean, I want to keep the conversation going, but I'm aware we've got 2 minutes to 11 and everyone will have other things that they need to be getting on with for the day. Thank you everyone for sort of attending the webinar, and special thanks obviously to Ben, Steve and Kiran around, you know, for speaking so openly and honestly. I mean, we've got another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks' time. We've also got one at the end of November, 30th of November, with the CEO of the Timpson Group, James Timpson. So he's going to be joining us to talk about his experience of leading Timpsons through the pandemic and the importance of being a kind leader. If anyone's got any further questions, or sort of, if maybe Ben and Kiran and Steve, if you've got anything you want me to pass on through the chat or through to anyone that's sort of come through there, feel free to just drop me a message. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today. And yeah, I hope everyone has a good rest of the day and manages okay through the rest of this lockdown.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.